I'm retired. I retired. This is the end of October 2007, and I retired from Delphi in June. So I'm just chilling, listening to a lot of music, downloading a lot of music, and I got a cat recently, and that's my friend, my new friend. That's what I'm doing, having fun.
Well, I've been retired since this bee flew in my mouth. Jesus.
And cut.
Anyway, yeah, I've been retired for a long time, and I do a radio show up here in my adopted area of Leland and Grand Traverse counties, and that keeps me busy. Other than that, just loafing.
You can listen to the radio show on the internet. You want to tell people about that?
Yeah,
What
it's
time?
Friday nights, 9 to 11 on WNMC.org. That's Nancy, Mary, Kathy, spelled with a C. Yeah, 9 to 11 I play old school soul and funk, obscurities. Sort of like black garage rock. I don't listen to it, really, I don't listen to much punk at all. Maybe 60s style, garage punk, but not a lot. I mean, I might listen to the Queers or something, because I know those guys, but not a lot.
I do once in a while. Ben and I, we're always sending like a song of the day to each other, email, and it could be anything. And I sent him the Sloppy Seconds song the other day. I don't want to be a homosexual. I hadn't heard for years, and it's just a funny song. But yeah, if I'm in the mood, I do. But mostly it's still, scrounging for 60s stuff. It's in the garage rock and funk and soul and, just anything, jazz. I mean, old country, hillbilly,
Yeah, my main two interests in music anymore are usually soul and funk, since I do that radio show, and jazz music. And jazz, and like Jerry says, I listen to some hillbilly. But and I like, I've always liked 60s, like jangly pop and that kind of thing. But I don't listen to a lot of current day punk or anything. I'm 52 years old, and it doesn't relate with me as
I'm
much
not going
as
to say
it
how
used
old
to.
I am, but I'm older than 52. But, it's still relevant. I mean, it still does to me what it did when I'm in the mood. I'm just not in the mood as often. I'm a retired man. I drive a LeSabre,
I'm in
and
the
I'm
mood.
just don't have the
I'm
time.
a hard charging stallion, always ready for stud duty. I just don't like to listen to punk rock too much anymore. I just looked at it as an outlet I was just getting in, I jumped aboard punk when it, sort of reinvented itself in 76 and 77. It was really on board since then. And then when, I think in early 81, through Michael Moore, he knew some people at FBE. He provided the outlet to get down there in the show, and that's the way I looked at it. It was just basically, it's like, I would buy these records and play. We had these house parties, and I would just sort of like DJ these house parties, me and my brother on. But now I had this opportunity to take it a step further and play it for more people. So basically, to me, it was just an outlet for the punk stuff that I was listening to, mixed in with, obviously, we'd mix in like 60s garage rock a little bit and stuff. But I can't say that there was any one individual that was inspirational. Obviously, Peter C. Cavanaugh is like an idol of mine, but I can't say the show was patterned after him. He did a show, and Jerry and me were both quite fond of, in the 60s, called Underground, where he played late at night, album tracks and songs that, just didn't make the top 40. And if anything, we were very influenced by that. It's like, we got a taste of it young. It's like, to stay hungry for music. Just because it didn't make the radio didn't mean it was branded as inferior. And so we took some of the spirit, I think, I did originally from Peter C., and it just went through the whole existence of Take No Prisoners. And we used to refer to ourselves as Pete Cavanaugh's Afterbirth, which he always took quite rightfully as a compliment.
The first concert I went to, and this is a historical event for me and the band itself, but I actually saw The Who in their first American concert, I think in '65 at Atwood Stadium with Herman's Hermits and Blues Magoos. You know, it literally changed my life. I mean, it really did. It was Keith Moon's birthday. I think he was 21. And that was the first concert I went to, so I got hooked early on. And then it was Sherwood Forest, mostly.
Mount Holly.
I didn't go to Mount Holly. I went, but a lot of Sherwood Forest for me.
Yeah, basically the same bands.
Yep, seeing you know, the Stooges, the MC5, and early Bob Seger and
Frost.
Amboy Dukes. Yeah, the Frost were, you know, and they just, man, it was we've talked about it before, and it's how we, when we first met each other at Wyatt Earp's, Doug's old store, you know. That's what we talked about. I recognized, I walked in there one day and recognized Ben's voice from, you know, the radio show. And that's what, you know, we started talking about was garage, you know, Michigan garage bands. And I made him a tape of some things he didn't have, and that's really how our friendship started.
Bossman, I think.
There was like, you know, Frigid Pink and Bossman, SRC. There was, you know, all these great bands that I always thought would go on forever, you know.
It was just an incredible scene back then, and great bands and great energy, and like when Flint got good again in the '80s, you know, in some Detroit area hardcore stuff, you know, it was sort of rekindling of that. But boy, what a great scene, you know, Sherwood Forest. I mean, for those people that weren't old enough to enjoy it, I mean, you really missed out on something. It was just incredible. And of course, these were like the sort of the hippie dippy years, and so they would put these incredible bills together, and people had a great tolerance back then for different divergent music genres, and so it would not be out of the realm of possibility that you go out there and you'd see the Amboy Dukes with Ted Nugent, you'd see the Bob Seger System, and then you'd see a blues guy, you know, or you'd see, I remember the Raspberries, one of their first concerts were out there, you know, the AM Hitmeisters, you know, singing Go All the Way. I remember being on acid at that concert, and they came out, they had these perms and in pink suits on, you know. Well, if you did that today, you know, people would probably, you know, throw bottles and castigate them for their perhaps questionable sexuality or something. But back then, I mean, you could just have the heaviest, most psychedelic thing, and then some ancient blues guy come out, then some pop band come out. Then you remember Tim Tam and the Turn-Ons, they were like a Four Seasons group. And then you had Michael Quattro, you know, out there playing, you know, synthesizer. Yeah. But people just, back then you just said, I'd got to dig it for what it is, you know, and not sit in judgment. But anyway, what a, you know, great music scene. And once again, Peter C. Kavanaugh was responsible for all this.
Yeah, he had these things called Wild Wednesday and Super Sunday where he'd have these all-day concerts. And yeah, you could also see Alice Cooper and, you know, like I said, the Stooges.
For $3.
And just hang out all day, and if you were into taking drugs, you could take drugs and, you know, drink wine, and, you know, whatever happened, happened. Nobody died, I don't think.
Speaking for me, and, you know, from the start of the show, I didn't want it to be anything that took itself too serious, you know, like Maximum Rock and Roll at the time or something. When it, you know, it's like, it's got to be hardcore all the time. I mean, we're not playing no weak shit, you know. But with me, it's like you had to still have a lightness to it. So that's why I would enjoy like playing a tune by like Voivod, and then play like Mary Mary by the Monkees, and then go back into Black Flag, you know. Because to me, it's all rock and roll. And these were playing a Nat Funicello song in the midst of all this hardcore. Just as a reminder, it's like, come on, you know, it's just all music, and especially under this large umbrella of rock and roll. Let's not get militant about, you know, it's got to be hardcore, you know, it's got to have this beat, you know, it's got to be played by guys with stubbly haircuts or something, you know. I think, obviously, Jim McDonald, who isn't here to speak, but, I mean, he was well known for his taste for reggae, and he liked reggae and ska music, and he would put that on the show. Of course, I'd usually defile it by playing, like, James Brown cuts, their sound bites over the top of it.
Hi, this is James Brown. Well, but it also goes back to WTAC, you know, and because back then, AM radio, you could listen to one station like WTAC and hear this huge variety. I mean, it was, there was soul, there was funk, there was garage rock,
Bubblegum.
bubblegum, easy listening kind of stuff, crossover, country. I mean, you could hear anything, and that's what we grew up, that to us, that's what music was. You turn on radio and you don't exclude anything. You listen to it all and it all sounds good. It's all pertinent. And now everything's compartmentalized. And, you feel sorry for kids nowadays because you don't have that. I guess that's why people started making mixtapes and things like that, because radio didn't do it anymore. But that's what we grew up listening
That's
to.
an excellent point, because like you could just take a top 40 guide from WTAC from like this week in 1967 or 68, and you would have Aretha Franklin, the 1910 Fruit Gum Company, Engelbert Humperdinck, the Kinks, Sam and Dave. I mean, right there's like 5 disparate music forms and genres, and you never separate them. Like, I don't dig, black music, or I don't dig, lounge music, or I don't dig hard guitars, or I don't dig, soft, wimpy vocals. I mean, you just, it's like, man, that's got a hook, that's melodic. I could dig that,
And also back then, you could hear, they would play a local band. It wasn't owned by some major corporation. If the DJ wanted to play a flip side of some single he got, and that's where, a lot of music broke because of that. Songs like, garage rock, 96 Tears, and the Stooges, and,
The Who.
And the Who, yeah.
Kavanaugh broke the Who, I think, in America.
Which is why they
WTAC.
played in Flint first, and, it all ties together.
Bill Pearson was the first. He got a gold record for being the first DJ in America to play the Raspberries Go All the Way, which turned into a million seller. So it was a launching pad. Jerry's right. Those DJs, Bob Dell, they got a record in, and it was the A side, and they didn't like it. They just flip it and say, "Man, we're going with this." And they could actually make records, or they'd take stuff out of the junk bin, like Bill Pearson, and say, "I'm going to play this," and there wouldn't be the repercussions. I mean, you'd immediately be fired on the spot today if you dared play a song that wasn't in one of these Arbitron-controlled, sterile playlists of 15 or 20 songs. So anyway, that's the fortunate atmosphere that was around.
We were lucky.
And we absorbed it. So when we got into radio, we wanted to do that too. We didn't want to be exclusively hardcore or exclusively anything.
They didn't. To me, they were pretty much alike. I'd go through periods. I got married, young, and I went through periods where I didn't experience the Flint scene in the early '80s. But even through the '70s, going to the old IMA auditorium, and then when I started listening to Take No Prisoners radio, when him and Jim were doing it early on, I began to realize that there was this huge scene in Flint, and it just seemed all for me just to roll in together. And it was the same thing, is that you got all this diversity. You didn't get just one type of a band or whatever. It wasn't all metal, or it wasn't all punk, or there was rockabilly and everything else. So to me, it never did change. It was all the same.
For me, it was. I thought, like in the '80s, in the punk scene around Flint or Genesee County, whatever, it was just much more local. I mean, you knew the bands. You went.
Oh yeah,
you went to the bars. You hung out with the bands. Obviously, with the scene at say Sherwood Forest, or those venues, Daniels Down or Mount Holly. Those bands, it was more of a regional thing as compared to a local thing, because they were bigger. I mean, they actually had songs on the radio. Bob Seger System, or Bob Seger and Last Heard, Dick Wagner and the Frost, SRC, even the Amboy Dukes had songs on the radio. So it was more of a regional thing. It was a little bigger, not any more or any less intense, but just spread out a little more. Where in the '80s, I thought it was really intense, because you knew these guys. You go into like a common meeting ground like Wide Earp Records, and you'd see these guys. You could talk to them, or you'd go to a bar and they'd be drinking, or it's just and then bands just sprung up from other people didn't really know much. Just like, well, hell, I'm not doing nothing. I'll start a band. I don't really know how to play anything, but guess I could learn 3 chords. And that was the spirit of it.
As long as there was a place to play, and there wasn't Flint, that was a nice thing. was always a place to play, and so when there's a place to play, then somebody's going to put a band together. But if you're out in the middle of nowhere and there's no place to play, then you're not going to put the bands together. But yeah, to me it was a diversity, and that I liked.
I don't really remember much of a local scene before Wyatt's, because he opened the same year that Take No Prisoners started. It seemed to just blow up all of a sudden. It was
like it was meant to be.
Yeah, it was meant to be. I mean, the local scene. We got the radio station. I got it in February of 1981, and it was 1981, I believe, that Wyatt's opened. And it just dovetailed so perfectly. It's like, here's where I can get my music now. And then, of course, Doug was like, well, here's where somebody will play music that will interest people to bring into my stores. But there really wasn't that much of a, I mean, there were bands, certainly. I mean, you had starting out with Dachau Club, and of course, some of the earlier bands like that, that were playing around. But they really didn't, like Dachau Club never even released a cassette, an official cassette to the public. So there really wasn't a scene for like bands, trading their tapes or selling their tapes, and of course nobody had 45s back then. So it's not to say there wasn't a scene until 1981, but there wasn't it didn't become, I didn't think, it really got rolling with the radio show and Doug Earp's, People just stepped it up a notch. It's like, well, now we have these outlets, This guy will sell our stuff, this guy will play it on the radio. So I think it was a rallying turnabout.
And like I said, I wasn't a part of it back then, but obviously Joel Rash and the shows I don't know when he started, if it was pre-81 or at the same time or after or whatever, but obviously you had to have a place to play too. I mean, and luckily there were those forces, you, Doug, and you and Jim, Doug, and Joel, and there you go.
Well, most of the venues before that,
it was like,
were always rented halls. It
Right.
was like union halls, and even that place over by where you live. What was that? The Armory. There by the old McDonald's Dairy, National Guard Armory or something.
Yeah.
There's some good shows there. It was a big place, but usually just anybody could come up with a down payment.
You have to rent a hall and
on a hall. That UAW hall there, I think on Dort by the expressway there. Seen some good shows there back when Dissonance was known as Dead Burnt Bodies.
Yeah, like I said, that was before my time.
Dead Burnt Bodies.
So
This all opened up to me when I started. A friend of mine told me about Take No Prisoners Radio, and I think it was 82 or 83. They hadn't been on for very long. My friend Tim and
Dr.
Jacoby, who he plays in all this in one way or another. But he told me about it. He says there's this incredible radio show, and these two hosts, and they're funny, and they play this great music, and it's the kind of stuff you'd like, and you'd love it. And I trusted his opinion, but I hadn't heard anything good on the radio since the 60s, when Peter C. I thought, it can't be that good, And then finally one Saturday night or Friday night or whenever, they were on, I listened to it and, it changed my life. But, and then I became, I didn't, it took a few years. But
getting single really helped.
Eventually, I started becoming aware of much more than what I was listening to, and the more independent stuff and local bands, and it was just, I was religiously listening to it, and I taped it every week and listened to it in my car all week, and it was the best thing I had heard since Peter Cavanaugh.
Like people could just realize they could home record things. They didn't have to go to a studio, because who could have afforded studio time?
Yeah, and you didn't have to, like you said, have a record press. You just put it on this little cassette that you could buy. And
well, back then, all those bands that were on major labels, and Seeger and Dick Wagner and Frost, the Amboy Dukes, they were all on big major labels, because there weren't any Sub Pops or whatever the hell you would have today.
When I started listening to Take No Prisoners Radio, he was probably underwriting the show at that point, but they were always mentioning, all the time, and plugging the store and that, and I started going down there, and it was like, I can remember the first time I walked in there. I can remember it vividly, and it was how many years ago, in the early 80s. And just seeing all these albums up on the wall, these weird obviously independent label albums, and that's where I started spending my money, and dropped thousands of dollars over the years in that place. I just thought it was through Ben and Jim.
I went in there. I guess he'd been open only like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and I lived over on the west side of Flint at that time, and one day I just drove by and I saw a sign that said record store, and I was like, wow, is that just, you could put record store anywhere and I'd be there. So went in and like Jerry says, right away I just had this great affection for it, because I was making these sojourns down to Ann Arbor all the time, because the radio show had already started, and I'd go to Make Waves and School Kids, and believe it or not, even Grapevine at the time, which was a chain record store, they had a pretty decent at the time alternative singles thing, where I was like buying the Pork Dukes and the Pistols and early Devo and stuff like that. But once I walked into Doug's and just saw this little tiny place, but then seen what he had, he didn't have that much stuff, but what he had was just like exactly what I wanted, the alternative stuff, and the prices were really great. Like Jerry says, the walls were just covered, you didn't see any Journeys or Styx or,
No. It was all alternative music.
It was just all, Big Black or, Black Flag or Circle Jerks or Dayglow Abortions. I mean, some damn thing you never heard of, And a lot of it you probably wished you hadn't, but, I mean, that was the place to go, and it enriched the radio show. And right then, like I say, there was a marriage between the radio show, Take No Prisoners, and Doug Earp Records. It never waned, in the existence of at least the radio show. Well, when I first started, I had a co-host named Ken Davis, who worked at the Flint Voice. We got this gig through Michael Moore, and I was writing record reviews for the Flint Voice, and this other guy wrote record reviews named Ken Davis. But we didn't have common interests in music, but he wanted to do it. And so there was the first battle. It was like, how do I get rid of Ken Davis gracefully? Because, I mean, I would play a set, then he would play, Graham Parker or Mitch Ryder. I mean, stuff that wasn't bad, but it wasn't, like hugely alternative, And I'm playing, like I say, the Pork Dukes and, the Pistols, Circle Jerks or something. So, got him out of the way and brought in Jim McDonald, and then the show really gelled. But at first it was a bumpy road that first year or two, because the school board down there hated us, and they really didn't want us off the air. And I can say a nice word for John Zooks, who was the station manager at that time. He really came to bat for us, especially in the early days. And he would say, look, I don't dig this crap either, but, there's no other outlet for it, and, these people are passionate about it. And he trusted in us, and when come fundraising time, they would see we did a pretty good job bringing in money, and money makes people like that sit up and pay attention. So anyway, we had some initial hurdles to get through, and then there was a comfort zone with us in the station. They said, okay, that's what they do, and it's late at night, who gives a shit, And but the first years were sort of contentious, and it was nerve-rattling time, and we'd always have to answer. They were always calling me and Jim in there to explain this, explain what you meant by that, who said this, what. But after a while, they quit monitoring it, and that's when we started doing the show In the Nude and Drunk.
Which was about the time I started listening to it,
There was a sense of community between our shows. There was 3 at the time. There was Barry Alec, who did a show called Alternatives, which was, he played more of the poodle rock, new wavy type of stuff. And, it was good for what it was. And then there was our show, and Phil didn't really respect us at the beginning, me and McDonald, because he was just militantly hardcore. And if it wasn't hardcore, and I think he thought we came with some weak shit, whenever we'd, play something halfway melodic or something. And so there was a little friction, not friction, but just tense times initially. But then Phil, he let his guard down more, and then, before you know it, he got canned, And basically, for pushing the envelope too much, we knew we had to play ball with these people. It's like, this was college radio or public radio, but still, they held the keys to the car, and Phil just, he was just adamant about being as militant and fuck you as he can, and it cost him his show, I don't think he really cared, to be honest, but I mean, he later, he just became a big fan of, the show. It just originally he was just so militantly hardcore,
I want to mention
God
before
bless
before we go any further, we're in Ben's backyard in Sutton's Bay. I just wanted to throw that in.
What's it look like? Oh, it looks nice.
It's, like I said, October of
We're not in Flint anymore.
2007. Well, as a early fan of the radio show or whatever, that's how I found out about what was going on in this scene, was listening to that. I mean, a couple times during the show they talk about, what was coming up at Joel's place, at the Capitol Theater, and who was playing and who had what out, new cassette by, the Guildies or Smiling Sacrifice, or that, someone, and that's, so as a fan, that's how I found out. That's how I didn't even know that there was a scene, and I didn't know that there was this stuff was going on, so.
Because obviously this stuff all predated the internet, so Take No Prisoners was, and Wyatt Earp's, these were your sources to find out about shows, and it was like a bulletin board, and people would call in and say, look, don't forget to mention the hall party here, or the Rankin Bars having, the Guilty Bystanders and the Row, or whoever it would be, and we'd make sure to pound that and get it out, to the people, because obviously in today's age, you just turn on the internet or go to a band's website and there's our calendar. But back then, kids were dependent on the radio show and flyers at, Doug's, and they weren't going to mention it in the Flint Journal or anything. Well, we had an array of engineers, and they were all good guys. They all, of course, had nicknames. There was Scooter, Dinky, Muffin Man,
Clunder,
the Lair. But I think the initial engineer that we had was Kenny Roberts, who was Dinky, right? No.
he was a Muffin.
He's Muffin Man, yeah, that's right. But yeah, Kenny Roberts did it for quite a while, from the onset, I'd say the first maybe 3 or 4 years. And he was a great engineer, and he was really good with sound effects. He was really good at, back then we would like call 105 and make prank phone calls and then air them, on the show, like calling up and say, yeah, can you dudes play, Black Flag or something, and, getting in an argument on the phone, and he would tape those, and we'd insert those, or start the show with them. Tim Seacrest, 105.
How can I help you?
It's like, I'm really enjoying your music tonight. That Styx and Journey sound great, but there's another band that sounds a lot like them called Black Flag. Could you play them? And he's like, what? Black Flag, what? And after a while, it'd be like, you bastards. It was sort of like Bart calling, Moe's Tavern. But anyway, so no, we had many good, dedicated, low-paid engineers, and without, the station doesn't exist anymore, but without telling tales out of school here, they would get as lubricated as we would, a lot of them, I think, thinking of the Lair, I can remember the Lair tripping one night. He was tripping so heavy that we thought we might have to. And it was really funny because me and Jim, all that time down there, never even bothered to learn to run the board, Now, I do this radio gig now, obviously the first thing I had to do is learn it. We never bothered to. We just wanted, we just sat down there at this table and answered phones and said, turn the music up and drank, basically. But no, we had a series of good ones,
Yeah, and eventually guys,
Dinky.
when I, came on board, and eventually, Ben left, it was guys like the Monk, Mark the Monk, and Scooter was still there, Bruce Stedron, who,
Scooter.
he eventually became like the head engineer down there.
Rest
Great
in
guy.
peace. Rest in peace.
Another guy is no longer with us. So,
Oh, who was Dinky
there was
then?
Motown.
Who's Dinky? Who's Dinky? Now Dinky's gonna watch this and go, I can't believe them cocksuckers don't remember me. Oh, Dinky. Dinky. We apologize sincerely for remember it. Crunch was an engineer down there. Steve from the Guilty Bystanders he was the only guy I knew that did the show sober. I mean, entirely sober.
Sean Wharton was an engineer for a long time. He used to play music. Or
He probably did.
He co-hosted. Well, yeah, he
You
liked
tell
beer.
me he was sober?
No, I'm not saying that.
I was gonna
He
say.
liked his beer. But, yeah, he was somebody that used to co-host with me once in a while and liked it so much. And, you know, so, oh, yeah, yeah. And he came down there and started engineering. And it was great because you had some guy who, you know, understood hardcore and he didn't mind playing minute-and-a-half songs. Because I know Ben started that up, and then I started doing that later on. But, you know, you'd give a guy, he'd have like a 15-minute sets or whatever, and you'd give him like 25. You still trying to think of Dinky?
Dinky was Kenny Klunder.
Was that what,
Rest in peace, once again, a guy who died very young.
is that you called him
Kenny.
Dinky? I remember.
Dinky, I think, wasn't he Dinky? Yeah.
I remember he was like, you know, Fred Flintstone and Klunder, the God of Thunder, and Dead Air Klunder, and I don't remember him being called Dinky, but maybe he was.
I'm pretty sure he was Dinky.
But yeah, Kenny Klunder.
Because he was anything but Dinky, and I think, you know, it's like calling a big guy tiny or something, Dinky. But Jerry mentioned the fact that, like an engineer, you know, it wasn't easy to engineer our show.
No.
Because so much of it would be on vinyl, and these would be, a lot of them, 60, 90-second songs. So, I mean, you had to be
Not even
queuing
that
up and,
sometimes, yeah.
you know, boop, 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 you know. But I got so, and once again, God rest his soul, Kenny, he had sometimes problems with keeping up. So I got to where I just put my whole sets on cassette, you know. I just did it at home, and I'd say, here, just put the cassette on side A, and, you know, several times he'd probably put it on side B, but.
Well, and it also back then, these independent labels, just because you had a 33 didn't mean, or an album didn't mean you played it on 33. It'd be played on 45, and 7 inches weren't always played on 45, they played on 33, and that used to screw up a lot of engineers. So you had to write down on your cue sheet,
I'd take
you know,
a felt
what
pen
side,
and write it on the
you know, the
label.
circle, you know, what track, what speed, and then they'd still mess it up, which to me, you know, it was frustrating. I know
That's what led me
for
to
Ben,
put it on cassette. you
for
know.
Ben, but as a listener, to me it was funny because then you'd hear some obviously fast punk rock song played it even faster.
Yeah.
And then you hear it go, woo.
Well, what would be even funnier is we'd be playing like something like Septic Death or something. We wouldn't even notice until about like 3/4 through the song and be like, yeah, this seems even faster than. It's like, sure enough.
Or it was
or you know, Roach Motel. You know, it's like it didn't sound good at any speed. Yeah, like be like, all right, we're gonna kill you. It's like that's on the wrong speed, but it sounds
good.
better. I think a combination. Lord knows they didn't pay very well down there, and they didn't get in many hours. But I think, yeah, a lot of them looked at it, I think, as a way of, you know, doing something that they enjoyed and being a part of something that, you know, they really liked anyway. And, you know, so if they made money doing it, you know.
It was always funny to break in new guys, you know, and I can't remember, but I remember Motown. It was like, I think, you know, the time the first did our show was like the first show he did down there. And this was a young black guy who was into soul music. And he was a great guy. He was one of the best engineers we ever had. And he was just this walking encyclopedia of Motown records, and that's how we got the nickname Motown. But it was always kind of funny, but you felt sad for the guy because instead of playing some 15-minute classical song, you know, his first day, and then there's some long jazz thing or whatever, he had to come down and do Take No Prisoners, where you had these minute and 30-second, you know, songs like bang, 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 bang of music that, you know, this guy probably never even knew existed. But
Well,
yeah, he was one of my favorites. He was a great guy.
An example of that, it was like, you never, I don't know if you ever had to do a show. I was working in the shop back then, and originally Take No Prisoners started on Friday night. And fortunately, most of the time I had this double up job, and I had a deal with my partner that I get out at lunch on Fridays. But there was a period where they outlawed doubling up in the factory, and for a few months I couldn't get out, so which meant we had to pre-tape the show on Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
And oh, geez, you want to talk about guys that didn't understand that music? There were two engineers who were staff engineers, you know, longtime engineers, you know, down there probably from the 50s.
Like Ed Rausch.
Ed Rausch and Paul Hoaxman.
Yeah.
Once again, God rest their souls, they're both gone. But, I mean, they were old then, and they certainly, they just used to, I remember Ed used to
Extremely
just
conservative.
wince. I mean, it was just like, putting a cattle prod up his ass, to sit there for 90 minutes, like, hey, Ed, you playing that in the wrong speed. He's like, what difference does it make? It's all noise. It's these bells and whistles and ugly fucking demons. Jesus. 666, baby. I don't know.
A lot of them are, I don't know.
Honestly,
Yeah.
God, so many of them are deceased.
Yeah, it's true. There must have been something, some carcinogens or something down there. Yeah, a lot of them
It
are
was
gone.
those asbestos headphones. I told them not to make headphones out of asbestos.
The mic, the pads they put on the mics, No, it must have been listening to the music we subjected them to. We were genetically predisposed to, have a tolerance for that, and they weren't. It just got into their brain and drove them crazy. I don't know. There's a lot of them are gone.
I hadn't even thought of it till now, but there's 4 I can think of. They're dead.